Welcome back to the Perusall Academy. This is our second week with Nolan, and we are very excited. He is going to present the next level session of the Academy today. If you are joining us for the first time, Nolan is from Perusall, and I'll let him introduce himself here in just a couple of minutes when he takes over. I'm CJ Shields from the Center for Teaching Excellence, and we are very excited to have you with us today. And Nolan's going to explore some of the features and benefits of the various Perusall assignments, connect discipline teaching strategies to Perusall, and configure Perusall for diverse pedagogical needs. And I know he has a lot of material, so with that, I will stop sharing my screen, let Nolan take over. I will monitor the chat, answer any questions you have, especially if they're A&M specific. If they're Perusall specific, then I will escalate those to Nolan and let him answer the questions, and look forward to hearing everything he has to share this hour.
Awesome. Thank you, CJ. And yes, my name is Nolan Quella. I am the engagement specialist here at Perusall. So I do a lot of the trainings and things like that. And I'm also the Academy host, and we're doing a custom one here for y'all today. I'm going to grab the screen and we are going to hop into our next level. Make sure I have the right page up. My calendar open right now. There we go. Okay. So now that we have a little bit of a baseline of Perusall and how it works, today we're going to talk about some more advanced things that we can do with this Perusall program. And the first thing we're going to be talking about is some advanced feature sets and what you can do with the assignments that you create. So the assignments with Perusall, we did cover some very basic ones at the start, just how to do a single part assignment and things like that. Today, we're going to take a look at how to create multi-part assignments and things to do if you go that route. And one of the first things you want to do with a multi-part assignment is you're going to want to make sure that you have all your material loaded correctly into the library, something we did cover in the Kickstart. And once you do, you're going to come here to your assignments tab. You're going to come over here to the add assignment button. And here, this is where you're going to be able to customize how many parts to the assignment you are going to want to add. So for this particular one, we can do, let's say, a 3-part assignment. And one of the great things about Perusall is, if I can move the zoom controls, there we go, is that you can assign multiple pieces of content to a single assignment and it will appear as one assignment in the gradebook. So for this particular example, we can come in and we can do an image. You have our students start there, come to part 2, and we can pull in a PDF article, pull that, and then we could even finish with a video for part 3. And so you can use any forms of material that you wish. You could structure it any way that you like. You can move the parts around at any point in time to make sure, okay, I want my students to go from the image to the video to the document, tie it all together. So this is a very common practice for our instructors that want to use different pieces of material for one assignment. The other benefit to multi-part assignments is using the same piece of material. And so what I mean by that is, if we remove these parts here and we start fresh, and I'm going to clear out this selection here, and we go with a textbook, let's say. Now, a lot of instructors like to jump around in textbooks, and with Perusall, that is possible as well. And once this loads from the wonderfuls, when we go through our Zoom share, hold on one second, let me refresh a little. Sometimes going through screen share on Zoom slows the process down a little, as we all know. So let's try that again. Make sure I got everyone. There we go. So when we come in and we add our parts, you'll notice that when we come to part 1 and we come in and we select a textbook, we'll do modern physics for this example. So a lot of instructors like to skip around. They'll come in here and they'll go, okay, I want my students to read section 1.2, but then I want them to skip down to section 3.1. This is where having multiple parts comes into play, because you can come to part 2, you can select that same textbook, and now you can jump to the next part. And unfortunately, I don't know why this isn't loading for me. I do apologize. There we go. There we go. So now you can come down to section 3.1. And now what you've effectively done is you've jumped to different portions in the textbook, and it will appear as a singular assignment in Perusall. So great tool to use the multimodal assignment tool here for. Now, with these multi-part assignments that you can create, when you come to the options tab, everything's going to be the same, no matter how many parts you assign. But when you come to the options tab, this is where you're going to want to expand on things a little bit for your students. Typically with multi-part assignments, you're going to want to come into the instructions for students and give a little bit of information. Remind your students that this is a 3-part assignment, 4-part assignment, whatever it may be. Give direction on particular areas of interest to focus on. That's usually a standard for multi-part assignments. And a lot of times instructors will embed a quiz as part of that multi-part assignment. So that's something to make note of too, is just a nice little reminder in there for your students to take that quiz there at the end. And so typically our instructors fill all that information out here for your students to see. And then everything is standard, all the same settings that we talked about in the last webinar. But with a multi-part assignment, scoring becomes different. So if this isn't your norm or your typical setup, this is going to be an instance where you're going to want to use these custom scoring parameters, because here you're going to be able to increase the value of this particular assignment. Typically, these multi-part assignments are worth a little bit more, and so instructors can add more points to that assignment here. They also can rearrange the scoring parameters to fit the needs of that particular assignment. So typically, you know, they'll void out things that may not be necessary. Like if it's a video-based assignment where they're watching several videos, they'll remove the reading to the end component. If it's one where there's no quiz, they'll void that out. So it's very dependent on the material within. But with almost all multi-part assignments, it is a custom scoring setup, and it's just dependent on that material that's put forth. Now, once you've got this all kind of dialed in and set up, when you save it, it will appear in your assignments, depending on the due date, and it will be listed as a multi-part assignment. So your students will be able to see that it does have 3 parts. They'll be able to see the directions you've provided to them, and they'll also be able to see what that material is that you've assigned. All the other analytics will be standard that you get for every assignment, but when you come into the analytics tab here, as well as the confusion report, the analytics will be available. For example, if we come to the page view report, for every part of the assignment, okay? And the student activity report will be available for every part of the assignment. So you're going to get those engagement analytics for each separate piece. And now the assignment itself, when we open that up and take a look at it, this is going to be the first thing that your students see. They're going to see those directions that you provided them. They're going to see the due date, and then they're also going to see all 3 parts of the assignment listed here. They're also going to see, I'm going to move this out of the way, that this is part 1 of the assignment. This will be listed here. They're going to have an option to jump to the next part here. And when they work on the assignment and they reach the very bottom, they're going to get another indicator that says you need to move on to the next part. So there's a lot of instances where they're going to be prompted to go to that next part of the assignment so it does not get overlooked. So your students will always be aware that they need to be moving on to that next section. And there's a lot of points where they're going to see that. And this is the first one there. And with a 3-part assignment, 4-part doesn't matter, because it's all built within a single assignment, you're going to be able to come into your grade book and you'll see that 3-part assignment. This is that one we were just in, and you'll see it appears as a single gradebook column, which will then be passed over to your LMS if you're using it as a single gradebook item as well. And when we click into a student's score here, we're going to be able to see their engagement metrics for everything and the comments they submitted. And then we're going to be able to get all that information for each individual part as well. And if there is a quiz embedded in that multi-part assignment, we'll be able to see the responses they put forth to that quiz too. So that is part of, or that is the entire multi-part assignment explanation. Does anybody have any questions about that I can answer? Were there any good ones that came in through the chat, CJ?
None in the chat so far. Doing a great job explaining everything.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, everyone. So those are our multi-part assignments, and they're a very heavily used feature in Perusall. The next one we're going to take a look at is actually the most advanced assignment creation that you can do. It takes almost a little part of every Perusall feature we have here, and it's peer review assignments. Another great tool for you to have in your wheelhouse. And to create that, we're actually going to start in the library. And here, we're actually going to start with a folder. To create a peer review assignment, or not even necessarily a peer review assignment, and an assignment where you're having your students upload material that you can then assign. So sometimes it's something, beyond a strict peer review of, something a student has written and they're evaluating it and then they're rewriting it. Sometimes instructors use this as examples for projects where students need to bring in an example of a website that fits this particular criteria, or an article that fits this particular direction. And then the entire class will then evaluate that piece of material. So what you can do is here at the student upload folder, this is going to be where you start. You're going to create a student upload folder, give it a title, give it appropriate direction, typically based on the assignment. And once you've created that folder, it's going to appear here in your library as whichever title you've given. I've given this one student upload folder, and it's going to get this unique little icon. And this icon is going to tell you that students are able to upload PDFs, Word documents, and PowerPoint files directly to this folder. So a lot of times what students will do, if an instructor goes, hey, please bring in examples of a website, they'll save that website image as a PDF and they'll upload that, or they'll take screenshots and upload it as a PowerPoint. But those are the three types of materials students can load in. And to create this assignment, you are going to need to wait for your students to get that material into the folder. Once they do, you'll notice it will appear here. It's indented, indicating that it has been successfully uploaded to the folder. And once that material is in and you're ready to create the assignment, you're actually going to come over to the assignments tab here, and you are going to click this little drop-down arrow. In this drop-down arrow, you're going to select Add Differentiated Assignment. And what this means is that you're going to create an assignment that allows you to assign different documents to different students, but it's going to appear as a single gradebook column. So with the peer review assignment, you're going to utilize that student upload folder. You're going to get your students to load that material in accordingly. And then you're going to come here to the differentiated assignment option. You're going to select that student upload folder here. And now you'll notice all three pieces of material are going to appear here. Now with a peer review assignment, what you can do is you have a couple options for how you want to assign students to evaluate this work. The first being you can randomize the students assigned to each piece of material, which is a great starting point. A lot of instructors utilize this. And what they'll then do is they'll remove the author from their own work to make sure that that student's getting the opportunity to evaluate another peer's work. But a lot of instructors will actually go through the process of manually assigning if the roster is allowing for that. If you have a larger enrollment course, it doesn't work quite as well if you have to manually assign a couple hundred students. But with smaller rosters where we do find peer review assignments being utilized, manual assignment is pretty solid go-to, because you can ensure that you don't put the author on their own work. But what you would do, and for this example, we can randomize, you get your students assigned to those particular pieces of material, make sure, okay, these are the students that I want evaluating each, and you get it all set. You ensure that the authors aren't assigned to their own work, and then you come to the options tab, which is our next step, as you would with any other assignment. However, this is where some instruction does come into play. For peer review assignments, and these are a little different than the ones where students are just uploading work as an example of a project or something like that, or a group assignment, something there. But when it's an actual peer review assignment, one of the standard things that has had to been placed in the instructions for students, and something I've gotten a lot of feedback from other instructors, is a reminder to be kind, unfortunately. But instructors have to put forth here, hey, remember, you're talking to one of your peers. Make sure your criticisms and your evaluations are written with kindness and respect. It does have to get said. So we highly recommend you do put that in there. And then also any direction, make a point to leave this amount of reviews on the material, or make sure that they've focused correctly on this topic. This is where you can put all of that information to help guide them through reviewing their peers' work. Another thing that this is used for is creating a rubric of sorts. So a lot of peer reviews that instructors create, they'll have their students follow a rubric. For example, making sure that they're focusing on a particular topic, that their thesis is clearly stated, that they've left 5 constructive comments, and they'll leave that rubric in there for students to follow as a guide. So that's another great thing that we see here in the instructions for students. The other very important option, this one here, anonymous posting. This comes into play very heavily with peer review assignments. Usually, instructors stray away from making it optional for students to post anonymously. With peer review, we almost always see it as one or the other. It's either students are required to post all comments anonymously. This has its benefits in that it gives the students evaluating the work a little more freedom to leave more honest reviews of the material. And it does have its drawbacks. There is the, feeling of there's no accountability for what's being said. So there are instructors who provide that feedback to us to say this is great, but also students don't feel responsible for their actions, because then they can kind of just say what they want at will, and they lose that respect. It's dependent on the class, dependent on your students. There are some courses where this works really well, and there's some where it can't be implemented, but instructors know their students well enough to know whether or not that's the case. For, more graduate level, we typically see this used quite often. Removing the option to post anonymously, again, has its perks. Everyone is responsible for their own words. Students are going to know exactly what was said between each other. And so this does get used as well. Both of these, though, regardless of if it's anonymous or not, the instructor always knows exactly who posted the comments. So there is the accountability there, but just something to be aware of. And finally, scoring. For peer review assignments, almost universally a custom scoring setup for these. They're usually weighted differently as far as point values, and almost all of them start with comment content only as the template to build off of. They start with this template because often, they're going to want to ensure that their students are leaving a high number of comments based on the material provided. And so this is the number one area. Usually this gets toned down to between 80 and 90%. And then the other portion is reading to the end to ensure the students are actually going through, reading the entire student's work that's been presented and going through there. Occasionally, instructors will build in getting responses because it's dependent on the course and it's dependent on the material. If they want conversations being started around the student work, instead of just strict feedback, this will get incorporated as well. But typically the two are common content and reading to the end. And these two are again, just the ones that are weighted the most. And they usually do create a linear pathway. It always adds up to 100%. So again, the starting point would be comment content only, and then building in reading to the end. And so you can customize this any way you need, depending on the material. You can put in the minimum number of comments you would want to put forth, which act as those critiques of the student's work. So that's building the assignment. And once you do, it will appear accordingly in your assignments area. But one of the things to be aware of is how you can provide your students, who are the authors of the work, with their feedback. So what instructors will do is they'll do those peer review assignments. They'll see the reviews left for their students, and then they'll come in here to the grade book. And in the grade book, they could come to their students who are the authors of the assignment. They can click into them and they can provide them feedback here. They could say, this is the criticism. They can copy and paste exact comments into it. They can do all of that to give their students private feedback on the assignment so that it's done in a way that's not public. It's done in a way that the student can digest it on their own time. And so this is where that's typically done. And so that is a peer review assignment in Perusall. And you can see that it does kind of take in all that Perusall has to offer in regards to assignments. Were there any questions about that I can answer?
We do have a couple about that. June, and I apologize if I mispronounced your name. Can the submission step from the students become an assignment, which can be graded by the instructor on the quality of the student's original submission? And then she has a second question after that one.
Okay, so the first question was, can the instructors set it up so that they're graded when students submit the work based just on their quality? And that can't be done by our system in the sense that the comments are graded by quality. The system cannot grade your student's entire entry for quality. It can only do the comments. So there's really no workaround to that either. There is no way to grade the students just on submission and quality of the submission. But that's a great feature request and something that I can add. I can say that we are working on building a more involved peer review process. So that is something I will add to that working feature.
Thank you, Nolan. And then the second part, suppose 3 reviewers were assigned to review one essay. Do all reviewers see their own review and the peer's review? Can independent review be allowed that peer reviewers only see their own review rather than the others? The author would then see all reviews from their peers.
Okay, hold on. Could you, is that in the chat? Let me read that.
It is in the chat.
Let me see
The
here.
very last comment in the chat. I've also got a lot of direct messages about A&M specific questions. I'm happy to answer those for those of you that have been sending those to me.
Okay, so suppose 3 reviewers were assigned to review one essay. All those working on that essay together. So if we went into that step here, so let's play this out a little and I can give this answer. If we came into the process and we pulled up the student upload folder and we assigned these 3 folks to work on this piece of material here, all 3 of these folks would be able to see each other's reviews on this piece of material. However, this is the only piece of material they would be able to see. They would not be able to see anything here or anything here. It would only be for this material. So they would be able to see one another's reviews. Let me get the chat back up. So they would see their own reviews, and then can independent review be allowed that peer reviewers only see their own review rather than... Okay, so authors, the only way for the author to see their own review or to see the reviews given to them by their peers would be to assign the author to that piece of work. That is possible. And now that author can see the reviews provided to them. However, because the assignment is one in which they need to review in order to earn credit, if you wanted to do that, what we recommend in that scenario is that once the assignment is over, you would have to manually adjust the score for Frank here, because Frank wouldn't be reviewing his own work. He would be looking at the reviews provided by these 3. And so in order for him to receive credit, you would have to go into the grade book and manually override his score, or else he would receive a 0 because he technically wouldn't be participating in that assignment. That's why we recommend going into the feedback area of the grade book, just because then you don't have to worry about that student losing credit, because they'll earn it by coming over here and working on another student's work. With that being said, though, a student cannot be assigned to more than one item in the folder. So if Frank was the author here, you couldn't assign him to any of the other 2. he can only be assigned to one thing. So if you wanted him to just, if your students were excused from having to review others' work because they put in their own original work, this would be the route to go. That only happens in certain situations, but it can be done, and this would be the route. Good question, though. And I think that covers that. Were there any more that I can answer, or was that okay? I think
That was it for now. Thank you.
perfect.
Great
Okay.
question.
That was a very good question. And that covers, our assignments that you can build within Perusall. And again, there are a lot of options there for the types of assignments that you can build with single part, multi-part, peer review, all things in between. The last type of assignment that I want to touch on is group specific. There are some instructors that will break their course into groups using under settings grouping. They'll come here to specify groups, and they'll create custom group sets. 1, 2, 3, we'll say. So now we have 3 groups of students. You'll notice here we have those 3 groups here, and we would just repeat that process. 1, 2, 3. Oops, that's a 4. And we'd fill out those groups accordingly. Now, with these static groups that we've created, these groups are not shuffled between items in the library. They're static throughout the entirety of the course. However, what you can do in this situation is you can create assignments for specific groups only, but you must be utilizing this feature. So if we set this up, we come through, we build this out, and we make sure that all our students are assigned to a course or to a group. We save those changes. Now, when we're going through and creating an assignment, you'll notice that when we go through the process, and we'll just pick a random piece of material here, when we get to the options, we have a new option here to assign to our students. Instead of doing the entire class or specific students, we can now do specific groups. So we can come in here and we can select group 1, 2, or 3. And if we select group 2, only that group and the students in that group will be able to, 1, see the assignment, and 2, receive score for the assignment. So this is a great tool to use if you want to build assignments for individual groups specifically. This is a way to do that. You just need to ensure that before you get started on creating the assignment, that under settings, grouping, that you have specified groups turned on and you have the groups correctly built. And once you do that, then you're free to build those group specific assignments. Something a lot of our instructors utilize as well. And with that being said, that's our assignment end of things. We are going to switch gears a little bit, and we're going to talk about scoring in a more detailed way. We're going to discuss discipline-specific scoring, but kind of on a bit of a more general term. So we're going to come in here into our scoring, and we're going to go into automatic scoring, and we're going to talk about these 7 parameters a little bit deeper. We're going to talk about them in terms of disciplines, and the 3 that I'm going to focus on today, it's a little general and it's built that way by design, but we're going to talk about STEM courses, humanities courses, and social science courses. Covers everything, and the feedback that we get from our instructors, it's pretty general as well, so it fits those molds pretty well. And we're going to start out with STEM. Typically in STEM courses, when they're configuring these 7 parameters, the emphasis is often on reading to the end of the assignments. So often they'll start on focus on reading and watching. They'll typically be videos used, things like that, but it's the engagement time. So STEM courses include, mathematics, physics, chemistry, OChem, all those things, where there's going to be a lot of engagement with the material. There's going to be a lot of formulas. There's going to be a lot of questions asking them to solve unique problems. And there's going to be a lot of back and forth with the material, not so much back and forth with each other. And so the comment content is still in play, but usually we see this number a little less. With STEM courses, it's usually between 3 to 5. And A lot of times as well with STEM courses, it's participation based. Reason behind this is because with those equation driven formula or pieces of material, the instructor will go, is this question correct? Is this formula correct? Yes or no? If no, what's the correct version? Excellent. And so it's that very quick, very just formulaic process. And so that's why it's often participation based. Great for statistics courses, math courses, physics, all of that. Opening the assignment, this is another one that's used a little bit more in the sense of it requires more visits here to earn this credit. So with STEM courses, students are often coming back in to finish the assignment. They're coming in to work on the problems. There's a lot of visitation to the material. So often this number gets increased quite high to earn this percentage. It's usually between 8 to 10 times. It's about the norm. Reading to the end, though, this is where the bulk of the assignment is. Most instructors will start off with this 40%. They'll either increase it or they'll leave it here. And it's the same with the active engagement time. This number is often quite high as well. And this is to promote students practicing in those STEM environments, working with that material, working with the equations, working with the vocabulary, and making sure that they really understand how the process works. And so that's why these two are often the most prevalent. Getting responses, not as much. This is often kind of, and it's the same with upvoting. These two here are often, they're used, but in a lesser capacity than our social sciences and our humanities. These are typically built in to give students a little bit of an extra pathway to earn full credit. And usually the numbers for getting responses is a little less. It's usually between 2 to 5, sometimes 5 is a max. And with upvoting, this is actually one where this is used heavily, but the percentage is low. Upvoting is very prevalent in STEM courses because it's quick. Is this equation correct? Yes or no? Thumb vote up, the whole class agrees. Perfect. We move on to the next piece of material. So it's used heavily, but the weight is less than. So they're making sure to get it in, but it's one of those things that help them earn that extra credit. Now, the only difference to this is a lot of times in STEM courses, this percentage will get bumped up quite high because the quizzes are so important in STEM courses and they'll get used quite often. And usually if this gets bumped up, these typically get bumped down significantly. And to accommodate for that, to make things just a little more balanced. So this is what your typical STEM course configuration looks like. Switching gears now to humanities. With humanities courses, there's all as well, a lot of times they'll start with the focus on reading and watching, but actually it's a pretty big start on focus on social engagement. This is where our humanities courses typically get built out from. It's either focus on social engagement or the holistic. These are the two that are the most used for those. I would say with focus on social engagement leading that charge. With our humanities courses, there is that emphasis on promoting conversation and having those conversation threads really run deep to pull more out of that content than they typically would. And so that's why you see an emphasis here on getting responses. Usually in the humanities courses, quizzes aren't as prevalent, so this is a little less, and usually that getting responses is up as well, and the upvoting too usually gets a little bit reduced, and the comment content goes up. This is a pretty standard build out for a humanities course. However, in here, this is where we see this number change. Usually in humanities courses, we see things between 7 to 10, like at the minimum. There's a lot of conversation involved. It's usually always quality based. And again, this is promoting those conversations, pulling more out of the material, learning from their peers, learning from the instructor. And so this is a pretty standard build out for a humanities course. And again, it's dependent on material, but usually 7 to 10 is about the norm for those comments put forth. Opening the assignment 2 is another one where For humanities, the number won't be as high. It'll be between like 4 to 7 usually, but the percentage is quite high because it's promoting, checking on the conversations, don't leave your peers hanging, make sure you're getting responses in, things like that. So this is often where we see our humanities classes built to. Now, on our last note, switching over to social sciences, this is an interesting one. With a lot of the social science courses that we see folks actually starting in the holistic or the focus on social engagement. It's typically the holistic, but sometimes I do see social engagement. The holistic provides this really unique balance that a lot of folks like to build off of. However, with the social sciences, we do see oftentimes 7 to 10, and then in a lot of classes, you'd be surprised, it's 10 plus for the social sciences, because there's a lot of conversations being had in this course. And the bulk of that in those social sciences is the quality of that conversation that's being had, which is why the holistic is such an excellent starting point for these. Because the quality-based scoring gets involved, it's a higher percentage. You're dialing in your communication skills, you're dialing in your writing ability, and so the emphasis is here. There is still emphasis on getting responses. Usually this percentage is, quite high, 20%, but this number is much higher. It's usually about 10. In order to earn that full getting responses number, it's usually between 7 to 10% here. Reading to the end, again, standard, making sure they're reading the material. Opening the assignment, though, this is another one that's usually quite high to make this percentage earned a bit of a bonus. With social sciences, however, the upvoting usually gets very much so lowered. Usually it's between 5 to 10%, and even that 5 to 10% is often with quite high numbers here in order to make that metric, again, more of a bonus than a given. So we have the bulk of the content coming from comment content with emphasis on getting responses, and then everything else fills in accordingly as the students put in that natural work. But that majority comes from the commenting in our social sciences courses that we see. And so that's like a general look at our discipline-specific build-outs, just for folks who may find themselves looking for, which template would best suit me depending on what course they teach. Those are the starting points for those. Were there any questions I can answer based on that material?
As of right now, they're not in the chat.
Awesome. Okay. So with that kind of in our wheelhouse, now let's switch gears and let's talk about some of the more advanced features that you can do with Perusall, now that you have a better understanding of the operation of the platform. Taking all this into account, there is a feature within Perusall, within the assignments themselves, to make your scoring a little bit more involved for your students, and a way to ensure your students are putting forth their original thoughts before being influenced by their peers. And that really helps with that quality-based scoring setup. So if we come into any assignment that we've built as the instructor, and we want to ask a question to our students, we can come in and, I don't know why I highlighted all that. But we can highlight this material here, and we can ask a question. And now, as the instructor, once we ask that question and post it, there is this button here. Oh, gotta move this bubble. This button here, it's the little puzzle piece. This requires students to respond to this comment before they can see any of their peers' replies. This is a great way to put prompts and questions into your assignments and ensure that your students are putting forth their original thoughts before they start piggybacking on what their peers may have written. Great tool that's used, and once you do click this, you'll notice that this little dialog box appears that students must respond before seeing any other responses by their peers. Great comment, great way to ensure, that quality is getting put forth and students are writing their own original responses before they start getting inspired by their peers. It's a newer feature and one I highly recommend using. You may have also noticed that when I was highlighting here for the first time, I got a discussion prompt. This is one of our newer features as well. It is only available for instructors, It is a discussion prompt built out by an AI. So it's a generative AI that will build a prompt for your students to see. It's a great way to start questions, something to build off of, completely optional to use and only available to instructors, but it's found once you first highlight a piece of material in the assignment. So with those two little features now, known, if we head over here to our settings and we go into advanced, here we have a couple of things too based on comments within assignments. Under our advanced settings and under commenting, this is where you can allow certain privileges for instructors, such as allowing instructors to edit comments. This is also where you can disable your students' ability to put any sort of GIFs or things into comments. But a newer feature that we have that's been a bit of a big one. This is where you can also turn off the ability for your students to copy and paste into the comments. This is a big feature that has been used recently, and it's one that is really taken off because it's preventing students from copy and pasting any sort of material, which is then ensuring that they're really putting forth their own original ideas. Something that's it's kind of one of those things where now here at Perusall, we're thinking, should we just have this turned on by default? Because it's getting used so much. And that AI discussion prompt that we just showed, this is where you can disable that if you want to. So if you don't want to see that prompt, you don't want AI involved, you can actually come here and disable it. And again, this is found under settings, advanced commenting. And oops. These are great. There are a couple more advanced features here under chats. If you don't want to utilize group and one-on-one chats, you can disable those here. And also under library and assignments, this is where you can like turn on assignment reminders. You can make it so that students cannot copy your course materials. You can make it so that you can allow students to copy course materials. Lot of options here to look through if any of these apply to you. I always encourage that. And again, they're found under our advanced area. And now another piece of advanced material within Perusall is the different types of access that we offer. So there's the access for students, which we covered, either can come through the LMS or students logging in at perusall.com. But a lot of our instructors utilize teaching assistants. And so now Perusall has the ability for you to add a TA to your course. It's found here under settings, access, TAs. And here it's a simple email invitation. You would insert your student's email here and invite them as a TA, and they would load in with a certain set of privileges. And those privileges are limited. They'd be able to see conversations across group discussions. They'd be able to highlight similar to an instructor, but they'd have no access to grades or any sort of assignment settings. You can also select these options here to give them just a little bit more of set of privileges, from seeing an anonymous comments to allowing them to see the grade book and analytic reports. But they won't be able to do any big course changes. If you need your TAs to be involved with making changes to your course, to building assignments, to making sure they're doing the grading and have the ability to override grades put forth by Perusall, you would actually invite them as an instructor to this course. Now, the great thing about this is when you invite them as an instructor, they will only be an instructor for this unique Perusall course. If they're using Perusall in some of their other courses, they will not get an upgraded account. This is only specific to here. If they're connected to the LMS, they will not have their account in the LMS upgraded either. They will only be given that set of instructor privileges for this Perusall course only. But this is great for instructors who need their TAs to be able to operate with that highest set of privileges. Building assignments, grading their peers, all of that stuff. This is where you would do that. You would invite them as an instructor. And so that's an important piece of information for our folks who do want to utilize TAs and give them a bit of more advanced look at things. Do we have any questions about that? Doesn't look like the chat's doing anything.
No, as of now, the chat's been pretty quiet for a few minutes.
Awesome. All right, so that leads us to our next set of advanced features, and that's actually our terminology. So here under settings terminology, this is actually where you can take the Perusall platform and get it to fit your unique teaching style that you're building out. Perhaps you're using Perusall not for a traditional course and student setup, but maybe it's a professional development workshop. Maybe it's a journal club. Maybe it's a study group that you're building for your students. Maybe it's a lab course that you're building. You can change the terminology of Perusall to fit that so that your students, your users, your participants have a more comfortable setting to operate within, where everything looks as it should. So under terminology, you can change all the framework here to fit that particular mold that you're utilizing. So that is an important thing. We do know a lot of our instructors will build out study groups for their students. This is a way to do that. And it makes things a little easier for folks to navigate around. Now, with that, we haven't had a whole lot of questions today, which actually usually I account for that, and it takes us a little further into time. But one of the things I want to touch on, and I can't remember, CJ, I don't think it was asked in our last one, but I may be misremembering a webinar, so I'm going to cover it again here today. Under your profile here, where your name is, if you click your drop down, none of you will have any of this. That's for me because I'm a Perusall employee, but you will have these last 3 boxes here. And under these 3 boxes, there's one important thing, my purchases. This is where your students can see the textbooks that you've had them purchase through Perusall. This is where they'll have access to those titles, either through perpetual access or rentals. This is where they can find those. But this is also where they can edit their profile, and instructors can do this too. Here, if you are connected to the LMS, you can select this box and you can use a different name. So if students want to use a nickname or anything other than what's in the LMS, they can do that here. This is where they can put forth their pronouns. And this is also where instructors and students can put forth a bio. Great way to give a little more personality to your Perusall profile, make things a little more friendly. And you can put your institutional affiliation and a custom profile picture. So this is cool too, because this little avatar here is where that profile picture will appear. And when you set it up with your avatar color, when your students are working through material. So if we go into any assignment here in Perusall and we're working, you'll notice my little avatar appears right here. So this is part of that social learning environment. If I'm here with someone and there's several students working on this assignment at the exact same time, I can click into their avatar and we can engage in a one-on-one chat. If I happen to be on with the instructor, perhaps the instructor's on here grading or going through reading comments, I can engage in a one-on-one conversation with the instructor. And so I can customize this avatar to be a little bit more reflective of myself. And then it helps promote that social learning environment. And again, that can be done here under Edit Profile. You can put that picture in there. And then this is also where all of our accessibility options are housed. So folks needing to use the Open Dyslexic font, if we need to change around color contrast, any accessibility features can be found here under Edit Profile so that our users can enable them as need be. And lastly, now that we know where all of that is, with that being said, so we have this piece of our social learning here. This is where we can have that kind of live interaction model. We could all be socially learning together. One of the other great features that Perusall has is if we come into an assignment, this is my example here, we have something called hashtagging. So you'll notice here I have all these hashtags, which are great. And these are information consolidation areas. So if I'm teaching a course and I know that throughout the entirety of the course, we're going to be talking about the conservation of energy, I can create that as a hashtag. And now every time a student creates a comment using that hashtag, I think I have an example of that here. or no, it was kinematics. Knew it was one of those. So we have the hashtag kinematics here. If that's a theme that's going to be running throughout all the material I'm uploading to Perusall, I can make that hashtag. And now every single time a student comes through and puts that hashtag into one of their comments, or if I do that as the professor, that information is going to get stored here, regardless of what assignment it comes from. And so this is a great way to take all the information related to one topic and keep it stored in one area for your students. And then they can engage and read through all the notes therein. So it's a cool little social learning feature that we offer, and it's one that does get used very prevalently. Again, great way to consolidate information into one place. And that actually takes us through the entire Perusall Next Level. Yeah, again, if anyone has any questions, if you can't think of them right now or they come later, I'm going to go ahead and I'll put my email in the chat again. You can always reach out to me at nolan@perusall.com, and I would be happy to help.